We will be covering anatomy and physiology of endocrine system in this video. The endocrine system is a collection of glands that secrete hormones. Hormone is a chemical signal or chemical that released in one part of the body that travel to target tissues and affect cells in other parts of the body to tell them to do something. A gland may be a separate structure or on its own, or it may be made up of a group of cells within an organ that function together to produce hormones. The hormones produced by the gland are secreted outside the cells that produce them. There are no special ducts to carry the hormones to their destination. Instead, the bloodstream is a transportation system. Once secreted by the gland, the hormones are transported by the blood and travel everywhere the blood travels. It can be to the liver, the eye, even the big toe. Although a hormone travels everywhere, it has an effect only on its target tissues because the cells of the target tissue have receptors for that specific hormone. A gland is an organ or a group of cells that are specialized for synthesizing and secreting a substance. There are two different types, exocrine glands and endocrine glands. Exocrine glands discharge their secretions through a duct into the external environment, for example, saliva, sweat, and tears. Endocrine glands secrete hormones directly into the bloodstream, and for this reason, they are often called ductless glands. Endocrine system uses hormones to control and coordinate the body's metabolism, energy level, reproduction, growth and development, and a response to injury, stress, and mood. Along with the nervous system, it makes the neuroendocrine system, which controls and regulates many of the body's functions. The endocrine system works with the nervous system to maintain homeostasis, with the hypothalamus being the major link between them. The endocrine functions of the hypothalamus include the production and release of hormones, so it is considered to be neuroendocrine organ. Like the nervous system, the endocrine system is all about communication. It involves one part of the body communicating with another part of the body to maintain homeostasis. Now we will see the similarities and differences between these two systems. Both systems use chemicals as messengers. The nervous system uses chemical neurotransmitters and the endocrine system uses chemicals called hormones to carry messages. The nervous system responds to a stimuli with very fast electrical action potential that result in the release of neurotransmitters. Also, the nervous system can be very specific by targeting just a few cells of the muscle. The effects of this communication can be stopped immediately if the nervous system stops sending nerve impulses. In contrast, the endocrine system responds to a stimulus by producing a chemical hormone and secreting it outside the gland that produced it. The blood carries this hormone throughout the body. The hormone will work not just on a few cells but on all of the cells that have a receptor for it. The effects of the hormone will continue until it has been cleared from the target tissue. Communication through the endocrine system is much slower to start, is less specific as to its target, and it takes longer to end than communication by the nervous system. What are the functions of endocrine system? The main function of the endocrine system is to release hormones into the blood while continuously monitoring the levels. Hormones deliver their messages they target by locking into the cells so they can relay messages. A person has more than 50 different hormones and they affect nearly all aspects of the health. It can affect directly or indirectly. The functions include metabolism, homeostasis such as blood pressure and blood sugar regulation, fluid and electrolyte balance and body temperature, regulation of growth and development, sexual function, reproduction, sleep-wake cycle, regulation of mood. Very small amounts of hormones can trigger significant responses and changes in the body. If the body has too little or too much of hormone, it affects the health. This often causes noticeable symptoms. The endocrine system consists of glands located throughout the body, hormones made by the glands and released into the bloodstream or the fluid surrounding cells, and receptors in various organs and tissues that recognize and respond to the hormones. The major glands of the endocrine system include the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, thyroid gland, parathyroid gland, pineal gland, pancreas, adrenal gland, ovaries, and testicles. The hypothalamus and pituitary glands are neuroendocrine organs. Now we will cover hormones briefly. A hormone is a chemical signal produced and secreted by an endocrine gland in one part of the body and transported in the bloodstream to affect tissues or organs in another part. Hormones coordinate different functions in the body by carrying messages through the body to the organs, skin, muscles, and other tissues. These signals tell the body what to do and when to do. Hormones are essential for life and the health. Hormones can be classified as steroid or non-steroid. Steroid hormones, which are synthesized from cholesterol, are insoluble in water but soluble in lipids, which are also known as fats. Therefore, they can easily diffuse into nearly any cell in the body because lipids make up most cell membranes. They include male and female sex hormones as well as aldosterone secreted by the adrenal cortex. Non-steroid or protein-based hormones are synthesized from amino acids. They can be further divided into protein hormones, peptide hormones, or amino acid derivative hormones. Examples of protein hormones are insulin, peptide hormones are antidiuretic hormones, amino acid derivative hormones are epinephrine and norepinephrine. Non-steroid hormones include amines, glycoproteins, peptides, and proteins, which are made from amino acids. Regardless of classification, hormones travel through the bloodstream to stimulate specific target cells. The target cells may lie anywhere in the body. It can be close to the gland or far from it. Once a hormone reaches the target cells, it binds with the receptor to trigger changes within the cell. How this occurs, though, depends upon whether the hormone is a steroid or protein-based hormone. There are three general categories of hormones based upon chemical structure. They are steroids, amino acid derivatives, and proteins. The chemical composition matters because it directly affects how the hormone relates to its receptor. Steroid hormones are derived from a cholesterol molecule. Examples of steroid hormones include estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, mineralocorticoids, and glucocorticoids. As lipids, they can pass through cell membrane to reach receptors anywhere in the cell. Cholesterol often has a bad reputation as being harmful to the body. However, it is needed to synthesize steroid hormones and other digestive salts. Cholesterol can be acquired through the diet and can be produced by the liver. It is a steroid found in high concentration in liver and egg yolks. It is also found in whole milk, butter, cheese, meat, but cholesterol is not found in plants. Next is amino acid derivatives. As the name implies, these hormones are derived from amino acids. Thyroid hormone, epinephrine, and melatonin are examples of amino acid derivatives. This type of hormone may or may not be able to cross cell membranes. For example, thyroid hormone can easily pass across a cell membrane to reach a receptor inside the cell, while epinephrine cannot. Next is protein. Protein hormones are made of chains of amino acids. Examples of protein hormones include insulin, thyroid stimulating hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, growth hormone, parathyroid hormone, antidiuretic hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, glucagon, calcitonin, oxytocin, and hormones from the hypothalamus. Proteins are too large to pass through cell membrane. There are many target tissues for the various hormones of the body. What makes a tissue a target tissue is the presence of specific receptors for specific hormones based on the hormone's chemical makeup and shape. The two basic classes of receptors for hormones are based on their location, either on the cell membrane or somewhere inside the cell. Protein hormones must bind to receptors on the cell membrane because they cannot enter the cell. They fit into the receptors on the basis of their specific shape, like a key fits into a lock. The hormones may initiate a response directly on the membrane, such as opening a channel, or they may initiate a response inside the cell, such as initiating protein synthesis. If the response is to occur inside the cell, a second messenger system must be used. In this system, the binding of a hormone in the receptor on the cell membrane causes a chemical reaction inside the membrane. This reaction creates a second messenger which then carries the information to where it is needed in the cell to initiate the function of the hormone. Steroid hormones and thyroid hormones can directly cross the membrane and fit into receptors inside the cell where the function will be carried out. They do not need a second messenger. Protein-based hormones can't penetrate the cell wall. Consequently, they bind to receptors on the cell surface. The binding of the hormone activates a second messenger system. The second messenger then activates specific enzymes. Enzymes then influence cellular reactions, producing the cell's response to the hormone. So, the second messenger stimulates changes inside the cell as a function of the hormone. The location of the target tissue is also relevant to the eventual delivery method of the hormone. Hormone function can be categorized by the location of the cells producing the hormone relative to the location of their target tissues. The vast number of different activities that take place in cells are coordinated by a complex communication system that involves the use of different types of chemical signals. Chemical signal molecule, sometimes referred to as the first messenger, is a substance that is released into body fluids which brings about a cellular response. There are several types of chemical signaling, a key difference between them being the distance that the signaling molecule travels to reach its target. First one is autocrine signaling or self-signaling. It occurs when a cell secretes a signaling molecule that may bind to receptors on the same cell, for example, interleukin. An example of this is the production of prostaglandin by the smooth muscles of the uterus, which causes the smooth muscle of the uterus to contract during birth. Next one is synaptic signaling. It occurs at the synapses when neurons secrete chemical signals, that is, neurotransmitters, which diffuse across the synaptic gap to adjacent neurons. Examples are acetylcholine and noradrenaline. Next is paracrine signaling. It is a form of cell-cell communication in which a cell produces signals that induce a quick response in nearby cells. The signaling molecules are secreted by cells into interstitial fluid and regulate the activity of neighboring target cells before being rapidly broken down. Examples are histamine and prostaglandins. Endocrine cells in the stomach causes neighboring cells to produce hydrochloric acid. Next is endocrine signaling. It is carried out by hormones released into the bloodstream which bind with hormone receptors on the target cells. Compared to local signaling, endocrine signaling is sometimes relatively slow as it relies on diffusion and blood flow. Examples: hormones that affect metabolism such as insulin, testosterone, and progesterone. Next is neurocrine signaling. It occurs when neurons release chemical signals into the bloodstream that affect distant cells. Examples are the hormones adrenaline and oxytocin. A cell must have specific receptor proteins on its plasma membranes or interior to which the hormone can bind to respond to the hormone. For example, the receptors for adrenocorticotropic hormone are usually found on specific cells of the adrenocortex. Oppositely, thyroxine receptors are found in almost all body cells because thyroxine is the main hormone that stimulates cellular metabolism. Target cell activation also depends on three additional factors: the blood levels of the hormone, the amount of receptors for that hormone on or in target cells, and the strength or affinity of how the hormone and the receptors are bound. Hormones also influence the amount of receptors that respond to other hormones. An example is progesterone, which antagonizes the actions of estrogen by down-regulating estrogen receptors in the uterus. Conversely, estrogen enhances the same cell's ability to respond to progesterone by causing them to produce more progesterone receptors. The process of upregulation involves the absence of a hormone, which triggers an increase in the amount of hormone receptors. The physiology of endocrine system includes the regulation of a hormone secretion and distribution, the regulation of a sensitivity of a target tissue to a hormone through the regulation of its receptors, and the elimination of hormones. Most hormones are not secreted at a constant rate. They are secreted when there is a need, and their secretion is usually regulated by negative feedback mechanisms. There are three mechanisms by which endocrine glands are stimulated to synthesize and release hormones. They are humoral stimuli, hormonal stimuli, and neural stimuli. First is neurostimuli or neurostimulation of a gland. In some cases, the nervous system directly stimulates endocrine glands to release hormones, which is referred to as neurostimuli. An example of neural stimulation of a gland is activation of the fight or flight response by the sympathetic nervous system. When an individual perceives danger, sympathetic neurons signal the adrenal glands to secrete norepinephrine and epinephrine. The two hormones dilate blood vessels, increase heart and respiratory rate, and suppress the digestive and immune system. These responses boost the body's transport of oxygen to the brain and muscle, thereby improving the body's ability to fight or flee. Next is hormonal stimuli or another hormone stimulating a gland. The hormonal stimuli refers to the release of a hormone in response to another hormone. A number of endocrine glands release hormones when stimulated by hormones released by other endocrine glands. For example, the hypothalamus produces hormones that stimulate the anterior portion of the pituitary gland. The anterior pituitary in turn releases hormones that regulate hormones produced by other endocrine glands. The anterior pituitary releases the thyroid stimulating hormone, which then stimulates the thyroid gland to produce the hormone T3 and T4. As blood concentrations of T3 and T4 rises, they inhibit both the pituitary and hypothalamus in a negative feedback loop. Another example, gonadotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus results in the secretion of follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone from the anterior pituitary gland. Next is humoral stimuli or substance other than a hormone stimulating a gland. The term humoral is derived from the term humor, which refers to bodily fluids such as blood. A humorous stimuli refers to the control of hormone release in response to changes in extracellular fluids such as blood or the iron concentration in the blood. For example, a rise in blood glucose levels triggers the pancreatic release of insulin. Glucose is not a hormone, but if glucose levels are high, the pancreas responds to that stimulation by secreting insulin. Insulin causes blood glucose levels to drop, which signals the pancreas to stop producing insulin in a negative feedback loop. It will be helpful to look at an example of the secretion of a thyroid hormone and the negative feedback mechanism that regulates it. If a person go outside when it is very cold but are undressed, the hypothalamus may try to speed up the metabolism to generate more body heat. This negative feedback mechanism is the thyroid's method of saying to the anterior pituitary and hypothalamus that it has received the message to secrete thyroid hormone and is following through on the message. It keeps the secretion rate from going too high. The chemical composition affects how the hormone is distributed in the blood. Thyroid hormone in the last example can easily pass through cell membrane. However, if it were allowed to do that, much of the thyroid hormone would immediately go into the cells, causing a huge spike in metabolism and then a dramatic fall when the hormone was used up. The body has a way to time release thyroid hormone and steroid hormones that can easily pass through cell membranes. Transport proteins or plasma proteins made by the liver are used to bind to some of the hormone in the blood. The bond is a reversible one, meaning that at any one time, some of the hormone will be free to enter the cell and some of the hormone will be bound to plasma proteins, making it too large to enter the cell. As time goes by, more of the hormone is freed from the plasma protein so that it can enter the cell. Hormones that cannot cross the cell membrane do not need a plasma membrane to bind. The effects of a hormone will continue until the hormone is eliminated from the system. Therefore, the method of hormone elimination is important in regulating the duration of hormones' effects. Hormones may be eliminated from the body in 4 ways. First is through excretion. The kidneys can remove a hormone from the blood and excrete it in urine. Or the liver can remove a hormone from the blood and excrete it in bile. Next is through metabolism. Enzymes in the blood, liver, kidneys, or other target tissues can break down the hormone and excrete it or use it for cellular processes. For example, the breakdown of protein hormones results in amino acids that can be used for protein synthesis. Next, elimination is through active transport. A hormone such as epinephrine can be taken back up by a cell through active transport so that it can be recycled and released at another time. Next, elimination through conjugation. The liver can bind water-soluble molecules to a hormone so that it will be excreted at a faster rate. Increasing or decreasing secretion of a hormone results in increased or decreased blood levels of hormone. This is because hormones are continually excreted in the urine and broken down mostly by liver enzymes. Negative feedback is a mechanism that controls hormone secretion. It is triggered by an internal or external stimulus. Now, we will review each gland in detail. First, we will cover hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is a part of the brain located superior and anterior to the brainstem and inferior to the thalamus and making up the floor of the third cerebral ventricle. It is located at the base of the brain near the pituitary gland or above the pituitary gland. Hypothalamus is a small cone-shaped structure that projects downward from the brain, ending in the pituitary stalk, a tubular connection to the pituitary gland. The hypothalamus is connected to the pituitary gland's 2 parts by a stalk that is called infundibula, which serves as a passageway. The hypothalamus plays a major role as a gateway for the brain to control the endocrine system. The hypothalamus is sometimes called the master of the endocrine system. Because this tiny complex gland produces its own hormones, controls the release of hormones from the pituitary gland, and plays a vital role in maintaining homeostasis. The hypothalamus contains a control center for many functions of the autonomic nervous system, and it has effects on the endocrine system because of its complex interaction with the pituitary gland. Hormones produced by endocrine cells in the hypothalamus enter the blood through the capillary beds in the hypothalamus. The blood then carries the hormones through the infundibulum directly to capillary beds in the anterior pituitary. Hormones can then leave the bloodstream to bind to their receptors in the anterior pituitary. This system of blood vessels allows for the direct distribution of hormones through the blood from the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary without traveling to the rest of the body. Hormones from the hypothalamus directly affect the release of hormones from the anterior pituitary. Being parts of the limbic system, the hypothalamus receives information from nearly all parts of the nervous system and is also sensitive to the composition of the blood that flows through it. It gathers and integrates information about the external environment and uses it to adjust conditions in the internal environment, which keeps the body in homeostasis. The functions of hypothalamus include releasing hormone, maintaining daily physiological cycles, example, circadian rhythms, that is, sleep-wake cycles, controlling appetite such as hunger and satiety, that is, feeling of fullness, managing sexual behavior, regulating emotional responses, regulating a stable body temperature, regulating fluid and electrolyte balance including thirst, managing stress response, regulating menstrual cycle. The hypothalamus contains special cells called neurosecretory cells. They are neurons that secrete hormones. Hormones produced by the hypothalamus come from two sets of nerve cells that communicate in different ways with the pituitary gland. One set secrete releasing hormone and the other set secrete neurohormones. Releasing hormones produced by the hypothalamus control the production of anterior pituitary hormones by either stimulating or inhibiting their release. These hormones are secreted directly into the bloodstream and reach the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland via a network of blood vessels that run down through the pituitary stalk. Now we will see what are the releasing hormones or what are the hormones produced in the anterior region of the hypothalamus. First one is thyrotropin releasing hormone. The production of thyrotropin releasing hormone stimulates the pituitary gland to produce thyroid stimulating hormone and prolactin. Thyroid stimulating hormone plays an important role in the function of many body parts such as the muscles, heart, and gastrointestinal tract. Next is gonadotropin releasing hormone. Production of gonadotropin releasing hormone causes the pituitary gland to produce important reproductive hormones such as follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. It stimulates the onset of puberty and the sexual development in both males and females. Next is corticotropin releasing hormone. Corticotropin releasing hormone is involved in the body's response to both physical and emotional stress. It signals the pituitary gland to produce a hormone called adrenocorticotropic hormone. This adrenocorticotropic hormone triggers the production of cortisol. It is an important stress hormone. Next is growth hormone releasing hormone. It stimulates the secretion of growth hormone. In the middle region of the hypothalamus, growth hormone releasing hormone stimulates the pituitary gland to produce growth hormone. This is responsible for the growth and development of the body. Next is somatostatin, also called growth hormone inhibiting hormone. Somatostatin works to stop the pituitary gland from releasing certain hormones including growth hormone and TSH. Next is dopamine. It inhibits the release of a prolactin from the pituitary gland. Next type is neurohormone. Neurohormones pass along nerve fibers in the pituitary stalk to the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland where they are stored until required and then released into the bloodstream. The two neurohormones produced in the hypothalamus are antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. First, we will see antidiuretic hormone. This hormone is primarily known as ADH because of its action on the kidneys. It is sometimes called vasopressin when secreted in high concentrations to stimulate contraction of smooth muscles in the walls of arterioles in response to hemorrhage or dehydration. Vasopressin regulates water levels in the body. When vasopressin is released, it signals the kidneys to absorb water. Next is oxytocin. This hormone controls many important behaviors and emotions such as sexual arousal, trust, recognition, and maternal behavior. It is also involved in some functions of the reproductive system such as childbirth and lactation. Oxytocin stimulates the uterus to contract at the end of pregnancy. It is also essential for the milk ejection reflex, which release the flow of milk in the breast of nursing mothers. Now we will see pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is a small pea-sized lump of tissue connected to the inferior portion of the hypothalamus of the brain. Despite its small size, the pituitary gland is actually two distinct glands. They are the anterior pituitary or adenohypophysis and the posterior pituitary or neurohypophysis. These two glands are made of different tissue, excited by different types of stimuli and secrete different hormones. There are many blood vessels surround the pituitary gland to carry the hormones it releases throughout the body. The pituitary gland is located at the base of the brain, attached to the hypothalamus superiorly by a stalk called the infundibulum. The pituitary gland is about 1 centimeter in diameter. It is situated in a small depression in the sphenoid bone called the sella turcica. Arterial blood is delivered to the pituitary gland via hypophyseal branches of the internal carotid arteries. Veins leaving the gland drain into the dural sinuses. The anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary lobe have different functions. The anterior pituitary gland is also called the adenohypophysis and is composed of glandular tissue. It manufactures and releases a variety of hormones. The function of the anterior pituitary gland is controlled by the releasing and inhibiting hormones of the hypothalamus. The anterior lobe has three regions. Pars distalis, these are the largest, most anterior part of the pituitary gland. Pars tuberalis, these are the extension that wraps around the adjacent area of the infundibulum. This is pars intermedia. These are the slender and narrow band that borders the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. This section may secrete two types of melanocyte stimulating hormone, also known as melanotropin. It stimulates the melanocytes of the skin to increase production of melanin, and the release of melanocyte stimulating hormone is inhibited by dopamine. Releasing hormones from the hypothalamus control the anterior pituitary's secretion and travel in the hypothalamus capillary network. These fenestrated capillaries contain structures that resemble pores and form the hypophyseal portal veins passing along the pituitary stalk to the capillary network of the anterior pituitary. The hypothalamus releases substances that are carried directly to the anterior pituitary via the blood. Releasing actions of the anterior pituitary are mostly stimulatory, although some have inhibitory effects. The primary and secondary capillary plexus, along with the hypophyseal portal veins, are the structures that comprise the hypophyseal portal system. Via this system, releasing and inhibiting hormones from the ventral hypothalamus circulate to the anterior pituitary and regulate its hormone secretion. Releasing hormones stimulates synthesis and secretion of one or several hormones at the anterior lobe, while inhibiting hormones prevents this from occurring. Numerous hormones of anterior pituitary, which are all proteins, regulate the activity of other endocrine glands. The first one is thyroid stimulating hormone. As its name suggests, it is a tropic hormone responsible for the stimulation of the thyroid gland. Thyroid stimulating hormone controls the secretion of thyroxine and plays a key role in the regulation of metabolic rate. Next is adrenocorticotropic hormone. It stimulates the adrenocortex, that is the outer part of the adrenal gland, to produce its hormone and plays a key role in regulation of the stress response. Next is follicle stimulating hormone. It controls the production of eggs in ovaries and sperm in the testes. Next is luteinizing hormone. It stimulates the gonads to produce the sex hormones estrogen in females and testosterone in males. Next is growth hormone. Human growth hormone affects many target cells throughout the body by stimulating their growth, repair, and reproduction. It stimulates the growth of bones and muscles. It also stimulates the liver to produce somatomedins, that is a protein that promotes cell growth and division in response to stimulation by growth hormone. Next one is prolactin. It has many effects on the body, the chief of which is that it stimulates the mammary glands of the breast to produce milk. It is also responsible for changes in the maternal brain that are thought to help prepare for the demands of becoming a new parent. Dopamine is a primary neuroendocrine inhibitor of the secretion of prolactin from the anterior pituitary gland. Now we will see posterior pituitary gland. The posterior pituitary gland is actually not glandular tissue at all, but it is nerve tissue instead. The posterior pituitary is a small extension of the hypothalamus through which the axons of some of the neurosecretory cells of the hypothalamus extend. These neurosecretory cells create two hormones in the hypothalamus that are stored and released by the posterior pituitary. The connection between the hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary is very different from that of the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland. Groups of neuron cell bodies in the hypothalamus produce antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. These two hormones are delivered by axonal transport through the infundibulum to the posterior pituitary, where they are stored. Nerve signals from the hypothalamus travel through the infundibulum and trigger the release of antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin from the posterior pituitary gland when they are needed. Although these two hormones are technically made in the hypothalamus, they are referred to as posterior pituitary hormones because they are released from posterior pituitary gland. Antidiuretic hormone prevents water loss in the body by increasing the reuptake of water in the kidneys and reducing blood flow to sweat glands. Oxytocin triggers uterine contractions during childbirth and the release of milk during breastfeeding. How the pituitary gland secretion is controlled. The pituitary gland does not release a steady flow of hormones. Rather, it releases hormones in phases or pulses. For example, growth hormone is mainly secreted at night, whereas luteinizing hormone surges in the middle of the menstrual cycle. The central nervous system plays a role in controlling hormone secretion. Likewise, the target organs themselves, through the process of negative feedback, controls the secretion of hormones. The brain constantly monitors conditions both inside and outside the body. In turn, it triggers the release of hormones as needed. For example, when it is too cold, it triggers the release of thyroid-stimulating hormone to promote body heat. After a heavy meal, it stimulates the secretion of growth hormone to break down fats for energy and use amino acids to build tissue. When the pituitary stimulates another endocrine gland to secrete its hormone, that hormone is then fed back to the pituitary, telling it to stop for the release of the tropic hormones. This process is called negative feedback. Negative feedback loops are used extensively to regulate hormones in the hypothalamic pituitary axis. A stream cold stimulates the hypothalamus to release thyrotropin releasing hormone. Thyrotropin releasing hormone stimulates the anterior pituitary to release thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone stimulates the thyroid to release thyroid hormones. Thyroid hormones stimulate metabolism, increasing warmth. At the same time, the increase the thyroid hormone inhibits release of thyroid stimulating hormone by the pituitary gland. Now we will see the pineal gland. The pineal gland is a small pine cone-shaped mass of glandular tissue found just posterior to the thalamus of the brain. The pineal gland produces the hormone melatonin that helps to regulate the human sleep-wake cycle known as the circadian rhythm. The activity of the pineal gland is inhibited by stimulation from the photoreceptors of the retina. This light sensitivity causes melatonin to be produced only in low light or darkness. Increased melatonin production causes humans to feel drowsy at night time when the pineal gland is active. Melatonin functions as a biological clock and can help to regulate the circadian rhythm, which are associated with environmental day and night cycles and help the body to distinguish day from night. Melatonin is not fully understood but appears to inhibit gonadotropin secretion to help regulate the female reproductive cycle and to control the onset of puberty. In children, melatonin may inhibit early sexual maturation. Large amount of melatonin receptors react to bright light can alter the biological clock. Therefore, altered melatonin levels may result in variations of appetite, body temperature, and sleep habits. Next, we will cover thyroid gland. The thyroid gland is located just below the larynx on either side and in front of the trachea. The thyroid gland consists of two large lobes that are connected by a broad structure called isthmus, forming a butterfly shape, and is covered by a capsule of connective tissue with secretory parts called follicles. Thyroid tissue is made of tiny sacs called thyroid follicles. Each follicle is filled with a thick fluid called thyroid colloid. The thyroid gland produces three major hormones. First one is T3, that is triiodothyronine. Second one is T4, that is thyroxine, or also known as tetraiodothyronine, and calcitonin. The cells lining the sac secrete the two main T3 and T4 hormones. Unlike other glands, the thyroid gland can store the hormones for later use. Cells between the thyroid follicles called parafollicular cells, also known as C cells, secrete another hormone called calcitonin. These cells lie in the follicular epithelium, protruding into the connective tissue surrounding the thyroid follicles. It is secreted in response to rising blood calcium levels. Calcitonin triggers the deposition of calcium in bone, thus promoting bone formation. Calcitonin is a polypeptide hormone that regulates concentrations of blood calcium and phosphate ions, and its release is controlled by blood concentration of calcium ions. Calcitonin inhibits osteoclast activity, which inhibits bone reabsorption and the release of calcium from the bone matrix. It also stimulates calcium uptake and incorporation into the bone matrix. Calcitonin is released when calcium ion levels in the blood rise above a certain set point. So, the function of calcitonin is to reduce the concentration of calcium ions in the blood by aiding the absorption of calcium into the matrix of bones. The hormones T3 and T4 work together to regulate the body's metabolic rate. Increased levels of T3 and T4 lead to increased cellular activity and energy usage in the body. The thyroid hormone is produced by the follicles and stored in colloid. Follicular cells produce glycoprotein called thyroglobulin. From this substance, thyroid hormone is synthesized, which affects nearly every cell in the body. Thyroxine regulates metabolism of carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins, determining the body's basal metabolic rate. Thyroid hormones are required for growth, development, and maturation of the nervous system. Thyroid hormone secretion is controlled by the hypothalamus and pituitary gland. Thyroid releasing hormone from hypothalamus stimulate anti-pituitary gland to produce thyroid stimulating hormone. These thyroid stimulating hormones stimulate the thyroid to secrete T3 and T4. Only 10 to 20% of T3 is produced from thyroid gland. Major portion of T3, however, is produced in peripheral organs like liver, adipose tissue, glia, and skeletal muscles by deiodination from circulating T4. The deiodination is controlled by numerous hormones and nervous signals including TSH, vasopressin, and catecholamines. Both T4 and T3 easily cross the cell membrane and interact with the receptors inside the cell. In the target cells, thyroid hormones stimulate enzymes that are involved with the glucose oxidation. This is known as the calorigenic effect, and its overall effects are an increase in the basal metabolic rate, an increase in oxygen consumption by the cell, and an increase in the production of body heat. Basal metabolic rate is the amount of energy expended while at rest in a temperate environment. That means it is not too cold or hot. The release of energy in this state is enough for the functioning of the vital signs. As basal metabolic rate is increased, so oxygen consumption is increased, as oxygen is required in the production of energy. Iodine is essential for the production of thyroid hormones. Iodine travels in the blood as iodide, which is taken up into the follicular cells by a sodium iodide symbiote. Iodide then travels from within the cell into the lumen through the action of pendrin, which is an iodide chloride antiporter. In the follicular lumen, the iodide is then oxidized to iodine. This makes it more reactive, and the iodine is attached to the active tyrosine units in thyroglobulin by the enzyme thyroid peroxidase. When the follicular cells are stimulated by thyroid stimulating hormone, the follicular cells reabsorb thyroglobulin from the follicular lumen. The iodinated tyrosines are cleaved, forming the thyroid hormones T3 and T4. These T3 and T4 are released into the blood. The hormones secreted from the gland are about 80 to 90% of T4 and about 10 to 20% of T3. Next, we will cover parathyroid glands. Parathyroid glands are 4 small masses of glandular tissue about the size of a grain of rice embedded in the posterior surface of the thyroid gland, with 2 on each side of the trachea. They are covered in thin connective tissue capsules and appear yellowish brown. These glands secrete parathyroid gland in response to low blood levels of calcium. Parathyroid hormone is also known as parathormone. It increases blood calcium concentration and decreases blood phosphate ion concentration to affect the bones, intestines, and kidneys. Parathyroid hormone acts with vitamin D to regulate calcium and phosphorus levels in the blood and bone. Parathyroid hormone is the single most important hormone for the control of the calcium balance in the blood. The major target cells are in the bones and the kidneys. The functions of parathyroid hormones are: it increases intestinal calcium absorption, it stimulates renal calcium absorption, and it stimulates osteoclast activity and therefore reabsorption of calcium from the bones. Normal nerve and muscle function, blood clotting, cell membrane permeability, and the function of certain enzymes all depend on adequate levels of calcium. Physiologically, calcium is important in the transmission of nerve impulses, and it is involved in muscle contraction and is also required in the creation of clotting factors in the blood. The regulation of parathyroid hormone synthesis and secretion is in response to the levels of calcium in the blood, which is monitored by cells in the gland. A reduced blood calcium level leads to an increase in the synthesis and secretion of parathyroid hormone. In an effort to achieve calcium homeostasis, parathyroid hormone exerts its influence on the bones, kidneys, and intestines. Parathyroid hormone inhibits new bone formation while stimulating the breakdown of old bone, causing calcium to move out of bone and into the blood. Parathyroid hormone encourages the kidneys to reabsorb calcium, blocking its excretion into the urine while promoting the secretion of phosphate. Parathyroid hormone also prompts the kidneys to activate vitamin D, necessary for intestinal absorption of calcium. After its activation by the kidneys, vitamin D allows the intestines to absorb calcium from food. The calcium is transported through intestinal cells and into the blood. Calcitriol is a hormone released by the kidneys in response to a decrease in calcium ions in the blood. It is known to have some effect on parathyroid hormone secretion and inhibits the release of calcitonin. It also promotes the absorption of calcium from the gut and the reabsorption of calcium from the renal tubules. Next is Thymus gland. The thymus gland is a soft, triangular-shaped organ found in the chest posterior to the sternum. The thymus gland produces hormones called thymosins that help to train and develop T lymphocytes during fetal development and childhood. The T lymphocytes produced in the thymus go on to protect the body from pathogens throughout a person's entire life. The thymus becomes inactive during puberty and is slowly replaced by adipose tissue throughout the person's life. Now we will cover pancreas, or the islets of Langerhans, or pancreatic islets. The pancreas is a large gland located in the abdominal cavity just inferior and posterior to the stomach. The pancreas is considered to be heterocrine gland as it contains both endocrine and exocrine tissue. An exocrine gland secreting digestive juice and an endocrine gland releasing hormones. Pancreas is an elongated, slightly flattened organ behind the parietal peritoneum. It is joined to the duodenum of the small intestine, transporting digestive juice into the intestine. The endocrine cells of the pancreas is only about 1% of the total mass of pancreas and are found in small groups throughout the pancreas called islets of Langerhans. The pancreas contains millions of microscopic structures called these islets of Langerhans, which are scattered within the gland tissue that produces pancreatic juice. Within these islets are 3 types of cells that secrete hormones. They are alpha, beta, and delta cells. Now we will see each cell in detail. Alpha cells. Alpha cells secrete glucagon, which raises the level of glucose in the blood, thus protecting the body from hypoglycemia. This is done by stimulating the liver and skeletal muscle to break down glycogen to release glucose into the bloodstream. Between meals, when blood glucose levels fall, glucagon stimulates liver cells to break down the polysaccharide glycogen into glucose and also to convert fatty acids and amino acids into glucose. This process is called gluconeogenesis. The resulting glucose is released into the bloodstream, causing blood glucose levels to rise. Beta cells secrete insulin that lowers blood glucose levels by stimulating cells and tissues to remove glucose from the blood when it is abundant by converting it into glycogen. After eating, the levels of glucose and amino acids in the blood rise. Insulin stimulates cells to absorb both of these nutrients, causing blood glucose levels to fall. Delta cells make somatostatin, which is a hormone secreted in the pancreas and also in pituitary gland that works within the pancreas to regulate the other endocrine cells and which inhibits the release of gastric juice. Specifically, it inhibits the release of both glucagon and insulin and slows the food absorption and the enzyme secretion in the digestive tract. It also inhibits the release of growth hormone. In short, when blood glucose levels are low, alpha cells secrete glucagon, which increase blood glucose level. When blood glucose levels are high, beta cells secrete insulin to decrease glucose in blood. Delta cells in the islets also secrete somatostatin, which decreases the release of both insulin and glucagon. F cells produce pancreatic polypeptide, a hormone that inhibits gallbladder contractions while regulating pancreatic enzyme production. These F cells are also the cells in the pancreatic islets of the pancreas. Glucagon secretion is regulated by negative feedback and prevents hypoglycemia from occurring when glucose concentration is relatively low. Glucagon is so powerful that just one molecule can trigger the release of 100 million glucose molecules into the bloodstream. Humoral stimuli causes the alpha cells to secrete glucagon, although stimulation from the sympathetic nervous system and rising amino acid levels also play a role. The release of glucagon is suppressed by insulin, somatostatin, and rising blood glucose levels. Insulin decreases blood glucose concentration, promotes amino acid transport into cells, increases protein synthesis, and stimulates adipose cells to make and store fat. Insulin secretion is also controlled by negative feedback, and insulin prevents high blood glucose concentration by promoting glycogen formation. Insulin secretion decreases as glucose concentrations fall. Just after we eat, insulin lowers blood glucose levels and also influences protein and fat metabolism. So what happens after we eat? Blood glucose levels rise as glucose flows from the digestive tract into the bloodstream. High blood glucose levels stimulate the beta cells of the pancreas to secrete insulin. Insulin triggers two reactions. It stimulates the cells to take up more glucose. It causes the liver to take up glucose and store it as glycogen. The combined result is that glucose levels return to normal levels. When blood glucose levels drop below a certain point, such as after skipping a meal, the alpha cells of the pancreas release glucagon into the blood. Glucagon stimulates the liver to break down stored glycogen into glucose, which it then releases into the bloodstream. This causes blood glucose levels to rise. What are the functions of insulin? Insulin enhances membrane transport of glucose into primary fat, and muscle cells inhibit glycogen breakdown into glucose and inhibits conversion of fats or amino acid to glucose. Because the brain, kidneys, and liver have easy access to blood glucose, no matter what the insulin level currently is, insulin is not required for glucose entry into these organs. In the brain, the insulin plays roles in feeding behaviors, learning, memory, and neuronal development. Insulin and glucagon function together to maintain stable blood glucose concentration, even though the amount of carbohydrates taken by a person may vary widely. Nerve cells are partially sensitive to blood glucose concentration changes. Such changes can alter brain functions. Prior to the development of type 2 diabetes, most patients develop prediabetes. That means blood glucose levels that are higher than normal but not high enough to be diagnosed as diabetes. Prediabetes may be referred to as impaired glucose tolerance or impaired fasting glucose. This condition increases the risk for developing type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. Now we will review adrenal gland. The adrenal glands are a pair of roughly triangular or pyramid-shaped glands found or sit on top of each kidney like caps and are embedded in the adipose tissue enclosing each kidney. The adrenal glands are also known as suprarenal glands because of their position as it is on the superior of kidneys. Instead of being one gland, though, each adrenal gland is actually two distinct glands. The adrenal glands are each made of two distinct layers, each with their own unique function. The outer layer is called adenocortex and the inner layer is called adenomedulla, each secreting different hormones. The adrenomedulla is closely connected with the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system, and the adrenomedulla consists of modified neurons and appears more like a mass of nervous tissue than a gland and functions as part of the sympathetic nervous system. The medulla is neuroendocrine tissue which secretes adrenaline into the bloodstream in response to activation of the sympathetic nervous system. The outer portion called the adrenal cortex is glandular tissue and secretes steroid hormones called corticosteroids. Hormones from the cortex are steroid compounds derived from cholesterol. Both the adrenomedulla and the cortex are well supplied with blood vessels. Now we will see each one in detail. The outer part of each adrenal gland, the adrenal cortex, is made up of three distinct functional layers of cells. Each layer is involved in the production of steroid-based hormones, collectively known as corticosteroids. The adrenal cortex synthesizes more than 30 corticosteroids. This synthesis begins with the cholesterol using a variety of intermediate substances in relation to the hormone being made. Steroid hormones are not stored in cells, and their rate of release is based on their rate of synthesis. Some of these hormones are vital for survival, especially aldosterone, cortisol, and some sex hormones. The adrenal cortex consists of layers of cells, including an outer zone or called the zona glomerulosa, a middle zone or called zona fasciculate, and an inner zone that is called zona reticularis. The outermost layer, zona glomerulosa, secretes the mineralocorticoids. The middle layer, zona fasciculata, produces the glucocorticoids. The innermost layer, zona reticularis, is also involved in the production of glucocorticoids but also produces small amounts of adrenal sex hormones, the gonadocorticoids. So corticosteroids are glucocorticoids or cortisol, mineralocorticoids or aldosterone. So what is glucocorticoids or cortisol? It has many diverse functions, including the breakdown of proteins and lipids to produce glucose. It also functions to reduce inflammation and immune response. They have an anti-inflammatory effect. They also suppress the immune system if secreted over a long time. Glucocorticoids help the body adapt to stress and repair damaged tissue by stimulating the breakdown of fat and protein, converting fat and protein to glucose, and releasing fatty acids and glucose into the blood enhances tissue repair. Glucocorticoids are essential for maintaining a normal blood pressure. Secretion of cortisol follows a circadian rhythm with high levels early in the morning and low levels at the time of sleep. What are the effects of glucocorticoid hormones in our body? They influence the metabolism of most body cells. They promote glycogen storage in the liver. During fasting, they stimulate the generation of glucose. They increase blood glucose levels. They are involved in providing resistance to stresses. They potentiate the vasoconstrictor effect of catecholamines. They decrease the permeability of vascular endothelium. They promote the repair of damaged tissue by promoting the breakdown of stored protein to create amino acids. They suppress the immune system and suppress inflammatory processes. The name of glucocorticoid hormones are cortisol or hydrocortisone, cortisone, corticosterone. Cortisol release is stimulated by adrenocorticotropic hormone from the anterior pituitary gland. ACTH releases cholesterol from the cytoplasm in the cells, which is then converted and modified to create the steroid hormones. ACTH secretion is regulated by the release of corticotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. Increasing levels of cortisol have a negative feedback effect on both the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, inhibiting for the release of both CRH and ACTH. However, this negative feedback system can be overridden by acute physiological stress, for instance, trauma, infection, or hemorrhage, and mental stress. The increase in sympathetic nervous system activity in response to an acute stress triggers greater CRH release, and thus there is a significant increase in subsequent cortisol production. The outer adrenal cortex or zona glomerulosa synthesizes aldosterone, a mineralocorticoid that helps regulate mineral electrolyte concentrations. Mineralocorticoids are the group of hormones whose main function is the regulation of mineral salt or electrolyte concentration in the extracellular fluids, mostly regulating sodium and potassium. The regulation of sodium is connected to the regulation of potassium, hydrogen, bicarbonate, and chloride. The regulation by mineralocorticoids of sodium and potassium is vital for overall homeostasis. The aldosterone helps the kidneys to balance sodium and potassium and stimulate water retention via the process of osmosis. If blood sodium decreases or blood potassium increases, the adrenal cortex secretes aldosterone. The kidneys also stimulate aldosterone secretion if blood pressure falls. Aldosterone secretion is stimulated by decreased blood volume and pressure and raised blood levels of potassium. Therefore, the aldosterone secretion is inhibited by the opposite conditions like increased blood volume and pressure and decreased blood levels of potassium. Aldosterone also enhances the absorption of sodium from gastric juice, perspiration, and saliva. It has regulatory effects that occur within 20 minutes, allowing precise control of plasma electrolyte balance. The activity of aldosterone involves synthesis and activation of proteins needed for sodium transport. There are several mechanisms that regulate the release of aldosterone. The primary control mechanism is the production of angiotensin II by renin-angiotensin system in response to reduced blood pressure in the kidneys or reduced sodium delivery to the distal tubules of the kidneys. Next hormone from the adrenal cortex is androgens or testosterone. They are produced at low levels in the adrenal cortex to regulate the growth and activity of cells that are receptive to male hormones. In adult males, the amount of androgens produced by the testes is many times greater than the amount produced by the adrenal cortex, leading to the appearance of male secondary sex characteristics. Androgens stimulate the development of pubic and axillary hair and sustain sex drive in both sexes. The sex steroids also include small amounts of estrogen. Because the amount is very small, it has little importance during reproductive years. However, it is the only source of estrogen after menopause. Next is adrenal medulla. The adrenal medulla is the inner part of the adrenal gland. It makes up about 30% of the total mass of adrenal gland. The adrenal medulla contains modified neurons called chromaffin cells that act as part of the sympathetic nervous system. The adrenal medulla is mostly a modified, densely innervated sympathetic ganglion made up of granule-containing cells. Within the adrenal medulla, approximately 90% of the cells secrete adrenaline and the remaining 10% secrete noradrenaline. So, the function of the adrenal medulla is the secretion of catecholamines. They are epinephrine or adrenaline and norepinephrine or noradrenaline. They are secreted under stimulation by the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. Both of these hormones help to increase the flow of blood to the brain and muscles to improve the fight or flight response to stress. These hormones also work to increase heart rate, breathing rate, and blood pressure while decreasing the flow of blood to and function of organs that are not involved in responding to emergencies. So, these catecholamines prepare the body for physical activity by increasing heart rate and blood pressure, stimulating circulation to the muscle, and dilating the bronchioles to maximize blood flow to the areas needed for physical activity. They also inhibit digestion and urinary production. It also boosts glucose levels, which is a source of fuel, by breaking down glycogen into glucose and converting fatty acids and amino acids into glucose. What are the effects of catecholamines in our body? They stimulate the nervous system, they have metabolic effects, they increase metabolic rate, they increase heart rate, they increase alertness. Noradrenaline causes significant vasoconstriction. Adrenaline causes vasoconstriction in the skin and viscera, but vasodilation in skeletal muscles. The secretion of catecholamines from the adrenal medulla is initiated by sympathetic nervous activity controlled by the hypothalamus and occurs in response to pain, anxiety, excitement, hypovolemia, hypoglycemia. The medulla receives its blood supply from the adrenal cortex rich in corticosteroids. These regulate the production of the enzymes that convert noradrenaline to adrenaline. Thus, an increase in corticosteroid production leads to an increased conversion of noradrenaline to adrenaline. The adrenal medulla secretes adrenaline into the bloodstream with a little noradrenaline when a person is frightened, alarmed, or excited. These hormones prepare the body for action that is called fight, flight, or freeze by increasing the rate and force of heartbeat, increasing the rate of breathing, converting glycogen to glucose, alerting bladder or bowel control, dilating the pupils, increased blood pressure, dilation of the airways, increased metabolic rate, increased blood flow to skeleton. This happens by diverting blood from the skin and gut to the skeletal muscles. Because of that, a person may develop a pale skin or a sinking feeling in the stomach. Next gland is gonads. They are ovaries in females and testes in males. They are responsible for producing the sex hormones of the body. These sex hormones determine the secondary sex characteristics of adult females and adult males. The testes are a pair of ellipsoid organs found in the scrotum of males that produce the androgen testosterone in males after the start of puberty. Testosterone has effects on many parts of the body, including the muscles, bones, sex organs, and hair follicles. This hormone causes growth and increase in strength of the bones and muscles, including the accelerated growth of long bones during adolescence. During puberty, testosterone controls the growth and development of the sex organs and body hairs of male, including pubic, chest, and facial hair. In men who have inherited genes for baldness, testosterone triggers the onset of androgenic alopecia, commonly known as male pattern of baldness. The ovaries are a pair of almond-shaped glands located in the pelvic body cavity, lateral and superior to the uterus in females. The ovaries produce the female sex hormones progesterone and estrogens. Progesterone is most active in females during ovulation and pregnancy, where it maintains appropriate conditions in the human body to support a developing fetus. Estrogens are a group of related hormones that function as the primary female sex hormones. The release of estrogen during puberty triggers the development of female secondary sex characteristics such as uterine development, breast development, and the growth of pubic hair. Estrogen also triggers the increased growth of bones during adolescence that lead to adult height and proportions. In addition to the glands of the endocrine system, many other non-glandular organs and tissues in the body produces hormones as well. The cardiac muscle tissue of the heart is capable of producing the hormone atrial natriuretic peptide in response to high blood pressure levels. Atrial natriuretic peptide works to reduce blood pressure by triggering vasodilation to provide more space for the blood to travel through. ANP also reduces blood volume and pressure by causing water and salt to be excreted out of the blood by the kidneys. The kidneys produce the hormone erythropoietin in response to low levels of oxygen in the blood. Erythropoietin released by the kidneys travel to the red bone marrow, where it stimulates and increases the production of red blood cells. The number of red blood cells increases the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood, eventually ending the production of erythropoietin. The hormone cholecystokinin, secretin, and gastrin are all produced by the organs of the gastrointestinal tract. These hormones help to regulate the secretion of pancreatic juice, bile, and gastric juice in response to the presence of food in the stomach. Cholecystokinin is also act as an appetite suppressant and plays a role in regulating intestinal motility. Adipose tissue produces the hormone leptin that is involved in the management of appetite and energy usage by the body. Leptin is produced at levels relative to the amount of adipose tissue in the body, allowing the brain to monitor the body's energy storage condition. When the body contains sufficient levels of adipose tissue for energy storage, the level of leptin in the blood tells the brain that the body is not starving and may work normally. If the level of adipose or leptin decreases below a certain threshold, the body enters starvation mode and attempts to conserve energy through increased hunger and food intake and decreased energy usage. Adipose tissue also produces very low levels of estrogen in both men and women. In obese people, the large volume of adipose tissue may lead to abnormal estrogen levels. In pregnant women, the placenta produces several hormones that help to maintain pregnancy. The placenta secretes estrogen, progesterone, and other hormones that help maintain a woman's pregnancy. Progesterone is produced to relax the uterus, protect the fetus from the mother's immune system, and prevent premature delivery of the fetus. Human chorionic gonadotropin is a hormone produced by the placenta during pregnancy. It helps thicken the uterine lining to support a fetus and tells the body to stop menstruating. HCG levels rise after conception and continue to rise until about 10 weeks in pregnancy. HCG assists progesterone by signaling the ovaries to maintain the production of estrogen and progesterone throughout the pregnancy. Prostaglandins and leukotrienes are produced by every tissue in the body except for blood tissue in response to damaging stimuli. These two hormones mainly affect the cells that are local to the source of damage, leaving the rest of the body free to function normally. Prostaglandins cause swelling, inflammation, increased pain sensitivity, and increased local body temperature to help block damaged regions of the body from infection or further damage. They act as the body's natural bandages to keep pathogens out and swell around damaged joints like a natural cast to limit movement. Leukotrienes help the body heal after prostaglandins have taken effect by reducing inflammation while helping white blood cells to move into the region to clean up pathogens and damaged tissues.